Most small business owners say, you can't find good people. Man, youth today sucks. No one's going to do it like me. The reality is you've never done a good job attracting good people. And if you've had them and you don't actually give them some ownership and control and let them turn your ideas into reality, you'll never have good people.
Welcome back to Life by the Horns, guys. So most business owners don't fail because they lack effort. They fail because they never evolve. They start as operators, doing everything, solving everything, carrying everything. And that works at first. It gets you off the ground, it gets you revenue, and sometimes even to your first $1 million. But then something happens. Growth slows down, time disappears, and the business becomes dependent on you. And no matter how hard you work, it doesn't scale because what got you here won't get you there. You didn't start a business to work 60 hours a week forever, but that's exactly where most founders stay stuck. And it's not a discipline problem, it's an identity problem. And today we're going to break down the shift that every founder has to make from operator to architect. Dustin, what's up, man? How you doing today?
What's up, brother? I'm good. How are you?
Oh, man, I can't complain. I'm just glad it's not cold anymore. So let me ask you this, man. When you hear operator versus architect, what's the real difference in how a business runs?
Yeah, I mean, not to be cliche, but I mean, the reality is operators are working in the business all the time. It gives them a lot of self-satisfaction knowing that their hands are on things, that they're in the day-to-day with everybody, because if I'm doing it, then it's right. Architects get out of the way and they're working on the business, period. And again, not to sound cliche, but that's the reality.
Yeah. So at what point does being a great operator actually start to limit your growth long term?
Well, what really happens is there's this idea of diminishing return. And I think for so many business owners, it makes a lot of sense early on, especially if it is your sole business, that I am the operator, I'm working in it, and I'm making sure that I can produce revenue so that ultimately, this idea or whatever we have pays off. But eventually, with like the idea of diminishing return, eventually you get to a point where it doesn't matter how many hours you put in, you start to see that less and less growth is actually happening. And then when most businesses get to that point, what they do is they start hiring agencies, like Best Life Group for more growth or whatever that may be, because they're in kind of this comparison syndrome. What have other businesses around me done in order to continue to grow? They still end up being the bottleneck, though, because when you're consistently the operator, even if you hire a great partner, like Best Life Group to come in and help accelerate that business growth, nothing about the operation has changed. And so what happens more often than not, and we have seen this, business grows by 50% in 4 months, we get fired. Why? Not because we did a bad job, because they're still working in it and they become overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed and all of this, but why do you think most founders stay in that role even when it's clearly like when all the signs around them show like they're clearly overwhelmed, it's clearly holding them back? Why do they stay?
Yeah, I mean, at a surface level, it's really familiar, right? I mean, this is what I've done. This is how many, or how so many other operators work as well. If they have done it, why can't I? And, to some extent, maybe you can. Then there's the idea of the ego. I should be able to do this. Why can't I? Or we get into comparison syndrome. I should be able to do this because he or she did this over here in the same space. And so I think those are two underlying things that are really important on the front end. But there's this other idea of identity that a lot of people really struggle with, which is I'm really good at being the operator. I've never been Mr. Strategic Decisions, big picture thinking, and all this other stuff, because most small businesses are founded by great technicians. I'm really good at doing the job. I can do it better than the guy that I used to work for, so I'm going to start my own business. And again, they get it to a point of decent success, but now you're at a point in business where you truly have to pivot if you really want to grow.
Yeah. So how much of it is identity versus just capability?
God, I mean, it really depends on the person. I think you really have to know yourself and what your blind spots are. I mean, I can speak for myself. So I'm really good at execution as a byproduct of just my upbringing and early career. I'm also really good at strategic thinking. Those two things normally don't go together. Where does the business get the most value from me? Strategic thinking, not execution. I move too fast. I pivot too quickly. I scare a lot of other people around me. It feels volatile. For me, I thrive in that. For most people, they don't. So it creates churn. It creates a lot of unwanted desires from other people. And so for me, the simplest thing to do is go, okay, well, where do I have the biggest or the most potential? And then what things can I do that I don't necessarily love, although I'm good at them, and have somebody else take that over? And so you asked, is it more skill set or is it more identity? I think it depends on the person. But regardless, I mean, if you look at my case, my identity was both. I could do both. I'd never done just one, especially on the higher level, which was strategy or the other. And so for me, I had to get out of my own way if we were truly going to grow.
How did you learn that? Unpack that for me, because you're really good at execution, like, and you're a unicorn, right? You're and great at strategy, but where did you learn that it's maybe not the best idea for you to be in the weeds executing all the time? How did you learn?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from trial and error and a lot of battle scars, man. I mean, if a real superpower is to be able to be introspective. And a lot of people say that they are and they're not. They actually suck at it. And as I continued to go down these rabbit holes of past experiences and what worked and what didn't, I generally saw that my leadership inside of teams was very, very high execution and exhausting for other people to follow. I was burning people out, which eventually meant that I burnt out because I was carrying all the load. I mean, I shared this story with you. I think it was like yesterday or the day before about the whiteboard I had in my office. And I drew a picture of a man inside of a little sailboat, and it had some holes in it, water's coming in. And then there was all these like papers in the water, which were ideas and things that I needed to work on. And the owner of the business at the time walked in the office and he said, "Hey man, what is this?" And I said, "This is me. I'm fucking drowning. All these pieces of paper are all the ideas and things that I need to work on. I just don't have anyone that can help me do it." And he's like, "Well, you constructed a team around you of a bunch of managers, so why don't they help?" And then what do most of us say? Well, they won't do it like me. Man, that's the ego getting in the way. And when you live and die by that idea, ultimately burnout is going to happen. You cannot out hustle it. You can for a period of time. But eventually you end up like me. It may look very different. Maybe you're not drawing stick figures on a board, as a way to kind of decompress and get some thoughts out there. But the reality for me was that I had built this high-powered team. I had just taken every bit of leverage, ownership, and everything away from them. And I'll never forget, one of the biggest call outs I ever had was in a meeting. And I used to have a poster on my wall that basically said, "If you don't have anything to add at the table, you will not have a seat." And so we would have these leadership meetings, and then they would go around and share some things. And I always had 900 ways as to how to make it better, why it wouldn't work, whatever it may be. And finally, one of our operations managers just said, "Why don't you just start sending us fucking emails? Why are we even having these meetings? Because what we say doesn't matter." My egotistical response was, well, it would matter if it was right. But as I got older and started paying more attention to patterns and things that kept repeating themselves, the problem was me. I was micromanaging everything. I wanted my hands in everything. I wanted everything, quote unquote, to be right. And the hard thing for most to understand here, and we've talked about this not in this podcast, but a lot recently, is this idea of you've got analytical thinking, analogical thinking, and axiomatic thinking. Most of us live inside of this analytical thinking all the time. And so what I mean by that is we're looking at data and patterns that have represented themselves in our lives and people around us. Most small business owners say, "You can't find good people. Oh man, youth today sucks. No one's going to do it like me." The reality is you've never done a good job attracting good people. And if you've had them and you don't actually give them some ownership and control and let them turn your ideas into reality, you'll never have good people, because really great people don't stay with business owners that just say, "Do it my way or take the highway." They don't. They want ownership. They absolutely do. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that you have to start looking at is, okay, you can say all those things, but if you're introspective enough and you get outside of your own biases and realize that you're thinking very analytically, the reality is you're normally the source of that thinking and of that problem.
You mentioned burnout, right? And I know we hear that word a lot, but there may be sometimes it's difficult to detect when you're actually burned out. Have you ever burned out before? And what does that actually feel like? Because some of our audience may not even realize they're burned out, and they are.
So yes, I've burned out several times, and we see it all the time. And we see it a lot in small business. You see a business owner, they take this idea, they bring it to fruition, they grow something, and then you see this trajectory where the business starts to go on a decline. And then they decide to exit and sell, and they're willing to take pennies on the dollar just to say that they got something from all their time and effort. And it's because they're burnt the fuck out. And a lot of times we see, and you can definitely see it in their decision making. So we start off and we have an idea and we're like, I see that there's opportunity in the world of business. And so if I do X, Y, Z and serve people better, man, we should do really, really well. So they start out with the right idea and right framework. And then when they're working in it all the time, and they don't attract good people because they don't pay them well. Their job descriptions, read like, a prison warden wrote the thing and whatever else it may be. And they treat them like that. And then people leave them left and right. What happens? You wear all the burden. And all of a sudden, what you were truly aligned with, which was this idea of serving people better, all of a sudden you start to see this operational shift. And it's like, let's do everything in our power to make this business easier for me. So now all of a sudden the business becomes more self-serving versus selfless, and how do we serve other people? And then when you see that start to take effect, I mean, we see it all the time with customers that we work with. Let's make it as hard as we possibly can for customers to work with us. It doesn't work. You need to make it as easy as you possibly can. And so that's generally what starts to happen. And that's when they get to the point where normally, they'll approach an agency like us, like, we've tried everything in the world. We just need help. And they think we're going to give them this silver bullet. And most of that silver bullet is a lot of reframes on how do we serve people better and create more value for them. And what's so interesting about that is when you start doing that and you start attracting the right customers again, and you start leading with true alignment, which is what we really are doing, and you attract the right team members to join the team, and then the thing comes back to life and you're doing it from a place of principle and integrity and true core values and true service to other people, well, then it feels invigorating again. Then it's exciting. And I could tell you that when I was constantly the operator and I was constantly looking for what my team was doing wrong, and I was constantly getting in the weeds and being too hypervigilant, it sucked. Because if you're looking for something, you will find it always.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Do founders stay operators because and maybe this was you, because they don't trust others, or do you feel like maybe it's because they don't know who they are without being needed?
I mean, both. So, I mean, the first part, not trusting others, again, normally a lot of bad experiences, right? Because we didn't attract the right talent and we didn't give them enough ownership. The opposite of that, if you lean into identity, I wouldn't know what else to do. We see that all the time. And I think there's a real reality here that's super important for people. Especially men, they're so deeply rooted in what they do. So you go to a business conference and you say, hey, well, what's your name? Nice to meet you. And hey, tell me about yourself. What does everybody say? Job title, where they live, accolades. No one fucking cares. I mean, even when in our own interview process, what do we talk about first? Family, hobbies. We go on a career journey a little bit. And that's it. We don't get into all this other stuff because you're wanted to make, true connection. But so many people, because in this civilization that we live in, everything is about identity. And identity for most business owners is what they own, what their top line revenue is, a bunch of shit that doesn't really matter. And so their identity is entrenched in, I am the hero of my business. When something doesn't go well, I step in and fix it. When things get really hard, I wear the burden and all the things. And early on, yeah, super important, super great. But here's the other reality. When you find those good people and you get out of your own damn way, and even if if you're fortunate enough to find such good people that they can do the thing without you, well, now you have some other opportunities because you have more leverage, which is time. This is going well. It's making money. Do I need to hire a CEO that knows more about this type of business than me? And yes, you will have to pay them well. But then can they get it to the next level? And I think, Michael, who was initially going to be on this podcast, I think it's something that he's done very well consistently in dozens of businesses. He finds a business that makes sense. He makes the investment. He gets in the weeds. He rolls up his sleeves. He figures it the fuck out. And then he finds somebody else to do it. And he gets out of the way. Why? He values his time with his family. He values experiences and traveling with them. He values finding other opportunities. And guess what? You can't do that shit when you're in the trenches all the time. And that doesn't mean that they always work out. But the reality for most is your identity is so deeply connected to you being Superman and you being the savior for your business. But I'll tell you what, I think it's much cooler to meet people that have a couple of different businesses that are doing super well, and none of those businesses hugely lean on them.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a huge ego component
Mm-hmm.
if they're staying in the weeds. So let's shift and talk a little bit more, dive deeper into control, because like you said, most operators believe if I'm not doing it, it's not going to get done right.
Yep.
and that's not true. Why do you think that's, or is that like, is that really true sometimes? Or is it the story that just founders tell themselves to, keep them, I don't know, feeling important, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think I've already answered this in a roundabout way, which is, this idea of if we're leaning into analytical thinking, yeah, they've got a lot of past experience that it didn't work out really well. And they've probably seen it in other businesses that they were in. Most business owners are the ones that are willing to take the risk, color outside the lines, try something a little bit different, do it better. And then I used to hear all the time in my one-on-ones and coaching, man, if only they cared as much as I did. And I used to just laugh and say, well, if they cared as much as you did, here's the reality. You have the most to gain and the most to lose. You probably don't compensate them on the gain. It's just steady no matter what. So why would they care as much as you? It's not their baby. So we create compensation structures around steady, not growth for most people. We don't give them the latitude to truly own anything and put equity aside, but just ownership of the task. We then, or we'll go out and we'll find somebody who's super great, and then we'll say, hey, this is exactly how we do the job. Do it exactly like this. Don't question anything. Just do it like this. Here's all the SOPs. Here's our project management tool, all the stuff. That's great. But you know what that lacks? The ability to actually be innovative, to be creative, to try something new. So like anytime I ever got into a new business, the first thing I always did was pay attention and ask a lot of questions. Like my 9-year-old son, why? And if the response was, well, this is just how we do things, help me understand why. Why couldn't we do it like this? I don't know. We just never have. That's not a good enough answer. And then if you take that person, in this case, me, and you just put me in a box that you have built and say, this is how you do things, I will not thrive. The only reason I was able to make a career last inside of a Fortune 50 company was because a sales manager gave me latitude to color outside the lines. And it was hugely beneficial for them and for me. But if I had to do everything by the playbook, I would have been bored. I'm a bull in a china shop. I want to try different things. I do not want to be a fucking robot. And that's what most business owners are looking for. They're looking for robots. And so that's why they struggle so much with this idea of trusting others and why they continue to just stay in it.
So let's shift to the other side then. Let's define the other side, the architect, right? So what does the architect actually do differently than the operators? Because I know we're talking probably to a lot of operators. I think it's important for them to kind of get a clear picture of the other side.
So if you think about it in its most like simplistic, analogous term, what do architects actually do? So let's say you want to build a beautiful skyscraper or a new custom home or whatever it may be. There is a builder that is involved or a contractor that is involved, but there is an architect that is involved. The architect is taking your vision and what you're trying to do and creating a blueprint for what it looks like when it comes to life. And then they give it to other people to execute on. They are not the one building it. They are the visionary, period. That's what an architect is doing. So in business, if you lean into what are the big picture things that we're trying to accomplish in the business, here are some ideas on potentially how we get there. They focus on relationships as well, because they're hugely beneficial, whether it be inside of their team or outside of their team. And then they let those people do it. They're paving direction. The blueprint is just a plan and direction. That's all it is. And the reality is sometimes, I mean, I love cars. So you see this all the time. You'll see, like right now, there's a new Dodge Viper that's coming out. It's going to be mid-engine. I believe last I checked, it's not going to be a V10. It's going to be a V8, 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, 100 and some odd $1,000. Super badass. But what do? They create prototypes, and then they go to the fucking auto show in Detroit. Then you see the prototype and you're like, man, this looks super great. And then what happens? And the production one comes out and it doesn't look exactly like the prototype that you see. This is and then people get pissed off about that, by the way, because you fall in love with the prototype. But this is what the architect is doing. They're creating the prototype. Essentially, this is the direction, this is where we want to go, this is what it should look like relatively. And then you give it to the operators, and the operators take your authorship and your idea and they own it to execution. It may look a little bit different than you initially planned, and sometimes that's a great thing. And Dan Martell would say, what is it, 80%, 80% of somebody else doing all the task is better than 100% of you doing everything. It's the same thing here. Like you cannot grow something and scale it if you're looking for perfection in everything. That is your ego. And I can tell you more often than not, I've missed so many opportunities because of that. And I've watched so many other businesses win because they were first to market and it wasn't perfect, but they got the attention of others and it was good enough. And then they ideated over time. And by the time we launched, they were on version 4 and we were on version 1. And that's what holds so many people back. It's okay to fail, just fail fast.
Yeah. Talk to me about that. You said that you've missed a lot of opportunities. Talk to me about one of those opportunities that you might have missed because you were sitting in ideation, trying to make it perfect, and you should have just gone.
Yeah, honestly, man, it's such a stupid one. I was sharing it yesterday with a good friend, and we had started our agency, and in this niche at the time that we worked in, nobody was doing meta ads. The only person in the entire space that was doing meta ads was me, and was doing very well. But I also had not trained any of my, small team on how to do it. And I was just so terrified. What if it didn't work? So I kept just regurgitating the process and testing all these things and over again. And then we were leveraging it for clients and it was working super well. And I was just like, man, I don't know if I want to take on this workload. And this is, pre-AI and automation and all this. And I just kept hesitating and hesitating and hesitating. And then I had this great idea. So I went to work with this company to help it come to fruition. And they did. Well, the reality was they ended up being my competition. And I'll never forget, like we were going into a big trade show together because, we were super friendly. And then they rolled out a marketing division because they were just emulating so much of what we were doing. And I'm like, how in the fuck can I sit in the same booth with you guys and we're doing the same thing? And they said, oh, just tell people that you're better because you are. We can just roll it out faster and handle more capacity. And man, it was such a blow because they were right, but they were willing to take the risk.
Yeah. I've had a couple of situations too, man. You just overthinking so much, and then somebody else just, dumber than a sack of rocks goes and just fails forward. So going back to the idea of architect, instead of doing the work, they design the systems, the roles, and the outcome. When a founder makes that shift, what changes first inside the business?
It depends on where the business is at. So, if you were heavily the operator and now all of a sudden you just decide you want to go down the architect road, depending on how you treated your people and the ownership that you gave them previously could have a huge impact. So if we have an all hands meeting and I say, hey, big change, here's what we're doing, you got to understand people are also very analytical. They only know what they already know from past experience. Now I'm going to give you all this latitude. And what do you think they're thinking? Well, shit, you said you were going to give us some latitude before and that never worked out. So, nothing's probably going to change. He's just excited and he's on a soapbox right now because he probably read a good book and he's got an idea. And I've heard that before about myself, for the record. So that's one thing to be mindful of. I think if that is where you are, it needs to be slower. Because there's another reality, which is not only does your team have to pivot in some capacity and change over time, so do you. You may hear this and be like, man, he's right. I need to start doing this. Most people, including yourself, are not ready for radical change. So that's the reality. Now, even if it is something that is brand new and now you're just building a team, again, you don't know how you're going to operate by giving people control. People love this idea of like, oh, this sounds nice. I could work less and have better team members and all the things. And you don't know what you don't know. And your brain and your body, or your brain, is designed to keep you safe, mindful of threats. And then so what's going to happen is if you lean into this idea of I'm going to give more control to other people and more ownership, the second you get the first project back that you're not happy with, oh, I should have just done this myself. This is not what I wanted. Pump the brakes. And there are two potentials here. One, you didn't hire the right person, and that's also on you. Two, you didn't give enough direction. And I think one of the greatest places to play with this to see if you're actually a good teacher is with AI. If your inputs suck, your output's going to suck. If you go in there and say, write this email better for me, it might be a little bit better and you're still not going to like it, right? Or help me create this project. I need to draft a policy manual for my company. I'm in this business space. I work in this state. Go. It's not going to be super great. And then so that can be your litmus test. That's also what you're telling your own team members, period. And if you're going to be super vague as far as being an architect, and you're going to say, hey, here's my idea. I want to be the authority on X, Y, or Z in this space, and that's all you give them, then you better be open to a lot of ideation and failed projects that come your way.
Let me ask this. What's the difference between, so you make this shift and now you're in hiring mode. What's the difference in mindset when you're hiring someone to execute versus hiring someone to own?
People that execute are just task rabbits. So generally speaking, it's somebody who is looking to come into an organization that has very well-defined processes, very good training, very clear KPIs. That's the majority of people because that's what they know. Somebody that owns outcomes has that entrepreneurial spirit. They're generally what we would call entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily willing to take the risk on their own dime, but man, they love the idea of painting outside the lines and being a little dangerous. So they're two completely different people. One has a much higher risk tolerance and is willing to hear no as long as it's backed by something that's relatively constructive. Your folks that execute, they're people pleasers by nature. They like stuff that's cumbersome and routine. And we see tons of that. I mean, that's generally your C players and some of your Bs. And you may think, man, I've got an A player. They're just so good at getting shit done. And what I generally say is that's your operational glue. They're not the one that necessarily elevates the business. They're the one that holds it together. You need more people that elevate the business.
Have you ever seen a business stall because the founder just couldn't get out of the way?
Every day. I mean, that's and a lot of them will also say that. Eventually they're like, I am the problem. I have such a hard time with letting go of control. I'm not good at X, so I don't know how to hire for it. I mean, I'll never forget. I mean, gosh, it's been, I don't know, 7-8 months, maybe a little bit longer. There was a gentleman that I was speaking with that was looking to hire an agency. And I said, ideally to you, what does this partnership look like? And he said, us not hiring you. And I laughed and wanted to understand why. It all came down to control. But the reality was it's very hard to control something you don't know and understand. It's also very expensive. Yeah. And there's this idea of opportunity cost that is associated with that. So, but yeah, we see it all the time. And you see it in really big businesses too, man. I mean, you see, the owner or the founders of Netflix. I mean, yeah, they got it to an exponential place. And finally they got out of the way, bigger than their wildest dreams. And they had to find other people to actually start executing at that level.
So you also mentioned that sometimes the owner or the founder may not be ready, or they don't know what they don't know. When do you think, just if a founder's looking at their situation, when is the right time for someone to shift from operator to like that architect mindset?
I think the best thing you do, I said being introspective is a superpower, and most people are not actually very good at it. You need to find somebody who can help you understand and see those blind spots. And for me, in part, it was a transformational coach. I mean, he identifies as a wealth coach, but the reality is it's a byproduct of what he does. Everything else is fixated on other things, which is you and your identity, past experience, how that shaped you, where the bottlenecks are now, how do we navigate through that stuff? And most people don't have enough self-awareness to do that. They just don't. So I think coaching is a huge byproduct of it. Also, we talked about this idea of analytical thinking. There's a lot of analogical thinking that goes on. And so in small business world, we look at other people that are like us and we do a lot of comparisons and what are they doing? And we should do the same thing. And we should try this and we should try that. No, this industry over here, albeit different, tried this and it seemed to work well. So I'll try it. So there's a lot of that goes on. And to some extent, it feels creative. It really is not. It's just remixing something that already works. You've got to look outside of your ecosystem and find somebody who's actually done the damn thing to help be the guide for you in that process. And you have to be coachable. So many people that go down that rabbit hole, oh yeah, I'm super coachable. And then they do this, yeah, but to everything that you say. And then the next thing is you actually have to put in the work and actually do it, which is my most frustrating and favorite thing to watch in the coaching space, which is I need a coach. I'm super excited. I'm going to level up my business. And they go through this mental masturbation, which is collecting more and more information so they can say they've done all the things. But the reality is you haven't done anything. You've just exposed yourself to more information. You haven't actually done the work. Real talk. Most marketing problems aren't marketing problems. They're business problems wearing a marketing hat. Cute, but very expensive. Maybe you're getting traffic, but it's not converting. Maybe you're converting, but your average sale is too low. Maybe things are fine, but not scaling. That's usually a system issue, not a need a new ad issue. So here's the move. Let's hop on a short call, look at your business, and see what's really holding your growth back. No pressure, no pitch, just a fit check. If we can help, we'll tell you how. If we can't, we'll tell you that too. Tap learn more and grab a time.
So when a founder starts stepping back, what's the biggest, and you've experienced this obviously, but what is the biggest risk that you feel? Like you start stepping back, you start shifting over to this architect versus operator. Like what are you feeling in those moments, and how did you deal with whatever you were feeling?
Yeah. So some of the first thoughts that are going to surface for anybody or what if this doesn't work? What if they don't do a good job? What if this sabotages some of my reputation? What if? And we could all pause and go no further because of those. And what I love to tell small business owners is when you got into business, did you start with 100 what ifs, especially the negative ones? No, more often than not, it was, man, this is so bad over here. Anything on this side could be better. What if it does work? And that's where you really need to start leaning in. And then what happens is if you actually have, found an A player, and for most people, that's an executive assistant to start. And that's giving up a lot of control. Most people don't think it is, but now all of a sudden, hell, in my case, they own social media accounts, they own calendars, they own travel plans, they own my inbox, they own so many things, and that's scary. And I'll never forget the first one I ever had. I was on a business trip. And I just remember sitting there and experiencing it with my family. And you were there at one point and just going, this is so nice to not have to check everything and know that people are waiting on me. But then there's this other version that you get to once you get outside of that, which is what we call the liminal space or being stuck in the hallway. Things are good. And now you're going, well, how do I go from good to great? And you're a business owner. You're used to problems. You're used to fixing shit. You're used to saving the day. And there's nothing to save. And then you start wrestling with this identity shift. Well, I'm not their savior anymore. Oh my God, things are going well. What shall I do? And what do a lot of business owners do? They start creating problems. Let's launch a new service line. Let me go ahead and launch another business. Something came up I really didn't like. I'm going to start digging into that. And you're taking their ownership away. And you start micromanaging again because, again, you've got something you need to fix. At least you think you do. You don't. And so a lot of times we then revert back. And then, again, because this analytical thinking, see, I tried it. It didn't work. Now, the reality is you didn't work. You didn't give it enough time to let it work itself out. And I was going through this earlier this year. I remember consistently pressing my coach he's like, well, what are the big goals for this year? And I kept saying, we went from chaotic as fuck to good. Now I want to go from good to great. And in my head, I had given like a 6-week timeline for this. If we don't start going from good to great in 6 weeks, I am probably going to find a new coach and I'm going to go do something else because I couldn't just sit in the stillness of good for long enough. I couldn't hold it. I've never been used to that my entire life. And so many folks, we talk about this idea of like, what is the word? Not self-destruction. I mean, it's in alignment with that, but self-sabotaging. And our identity is so used to being the fixer and everything, we actually fuck shit up. We fuck shit up.
Like Michael Jordan used to have in his mind where he just create problems just so that he can perform at
so he could get into some of that that dark energy that we carry, but for me, and one of the greatest lessons was learning patience in that process. It's okay to have some stillness. We went for 2 months without real growth. Now we had no churn, which is great, but not a lot of new customer acquisition. And I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't have hired this sales development rep. That's the problem. Oh man. And I just started going through all these things that, maybe this was too soon. Again, maybe I need a different coach, maybe this, maybe that. And then when I finally just said, you know what, this is actually nice. It's nice to sit here in these moments because, when do you generally have the best ideas? In stillness, not when you're hyper reactive and trying to survive. And then all of a sudden what happens? Oh man, leads are pouring back in, new clients are joining the organization, solidifying better partnerships, more ideas are coming our way. We're executing on this, phenomenal project behind the scenes that's going to be so good for the people that we work with and our team. But none of that could have happened without the stillness. And that's the most challenging spot is when you get into that liminal space, you can't go back to those old patterns.
So guys, it's fair to say operators build businesses, architects are going to build systems that build businesses. So I've got some rapid fire questions for you, Dustin. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Can't think too much. Operator or architect?
Architect.
Control or trust?
Trust.
Speed or structure?
Speed.
Busy or effective?
Effective.
One truth that founders don't want to hear.
You're the problem.
Now, if a founder is listening right now, stuck in the day to day, working harder than ever, but not growing, what's the first shift that they need to make this week?
Man, there's so many things here, but I would say the simplest thing to do right here that I've encouraged so many to do is literally get a spreadsheet or get out a piece of paper and start tracking your week. Hour by hour, big picture, what are you doing? I do this in a spreadsheet and then I go through and I color code it. And things that feed me, that are good for the organization and that I love, I make green. Things that bleed me, that I'm not necessarily the best at, they have to get done though. There's not great ROI on my time, etc. I make those red. And then there's stuff that I make yellow, which is stuff that just, it has to exist. I do need to be a part of. So, those are certain meetings and those types of things. And then what I do over time is I slowly just start looking at how can I delegate this to somebody else or something, potentially AI. How can I take more of this off my plate because it doesn't have high ROI for my energy or the business, or preferably both, and have somebody else take care of that or something else take care of that. And then lean more into the green, because if it gives me energy and it's good for the business, guess what'll happen? I'm not going to burn out. So I would start there.
Awesome. Awesome. So guys, most founders don't get stuck because they aren't working hard enough. They get stuck because they never change roles. And you can't scale a business that depends on you. And you can't build something bigger until you stop being the one holding it all together. The shift isn't easy, but it's necessary. This is Lyfe by the Horns. And I hope you guys got some value from this today. Like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.